Good evening, everybody. Let us start with today's edition of the Hindu that we have started, the Hindu Made Easy section. In today's headlines, what we find that the first top headline is regarding the inflation. June inflation quickens to as the prices of the cost of the food prices climb, and due to this reason, rise in the inflation, and still RBI is taking the measures necessary for control of these. Another article on inflation is in the op-ed section regarding the consumer price index CPI inflation. We have no consumer price index inflation and wholesale price index. So CPI, or regarding that, when we reach there, we will find that what they mention here. Other headlines that conclude that DMK now has said that UCC, that's the Informed Civil Code, will have a disastrous effect. As we know that people are voicing their concern regarding the Informed Civil Code. Before that, you as a student should be concerned, should be knowing that much, not concerned, but should be knowing the differences between the Common Civil Code and Informed Civil Code. That is one important point and one to understand. Then we have one more headline, that is the Manipur police have registered criminal case against the Methi chief for various charges, criminal charges. Now come to the spotlight section. The second page, often that you find in week, 2 days or 3 days, most probably they give a spotlight. It's a full page article which is related with some domestic issues, concern and all. In today's article, what we find that this heading is Kerala's annual battle with fever. Okay, Kerala's annual battle with fever, and thus first one is that's the endemic nature. Every year during the onset of monsoon, as you know that Kerala coast is the first to receive the southwest monsoon, and environmental issues, onset of monsoon, hot climate, humidity and other regional factors lead to every year coming of the dengue and listosporosis, leptospirosis, one particular disease that has been mentioned. So there, you should read the spotlight, no matter even if it is concerned about the domestic issues, because it's good to read always the big long form narrative articles. Then we move to our major section, that's editorial section. We'll move to here. What we find that within the editorial section, one very important article is by Shashi Tharoor. You know it, everybody knows. Those who have interest in language, English language especially, they know it very well who the Shashi Tharoor is. He has written more than a dozen fiction and non-fiction works, and he was an executive bureaucrat with the United Nations. And right now he is the member of parliament from Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. And we know that his one of the famous book is An Era of Darkness, that deals with the colonization of India and its impact, its loot, intransigence, and other violence related and long-term impact that it had on the colonized state. In this particular editorial, he mentions about this loot, intransigence and the darkening of a colonial blot, darkening of the colonial blot. Okay, what is the, it's a loot in the sense that we know that it is being evaluated that $45 trillion worth of loot was there from the colonial masters in their virtually 200 years of rule. Very early economic consequences and things were studied by, as we are aware of, Rajani Palamdat in his work India Today. Gopal Krishna Gokhale used to have his budget speech in the Viceroy's Council, full of those figures and things like that. So here in this particular case, Shashi Tharoor mentions about that he starts the article with a case of Netherlands. We have another article on Netherlands in editorial section titled Migrant Crisis. That will come later. First, let me finish this Shashi Tharoor article, that is heading Loot, Intransigence and the Darkening of Colonial Blot. Here he starts the article with the case of the Netherlands, that how around 500 artifacts they have returned to Indonesia and Sri Lanka, where they are earlier colonial masters. Now it says that article and the author insists upon that Britain should also learn from this, and they should also do something regarding returning precious Kohinoor and other things like that. He says that London museums are virtually, they are known as Chor Bazaar. We know that very famously in London, Shashi Tharoor has termed this term that if you are in London and have time to, you are here for vacation and all, then okay, of course you must visit London Museum and what we call as Chor Bazaar. This is virtually all the artifacts are from the Indian subcontinent that they have, from whether it's a stupa of Sanchi or you know it very well, the Queen Mother had Kohinoor in her crown, and lots of things are there. So Britain should at least, when it comes to financial reparations, that is returning the losses and all things, it is quite impossible, but at least they can ask for, they could say sorry, and as the at least they should, an example is given of here example is given is the Chancellor of Germany, Willy Brandt, that how in police ghettos he went on his knees to apologize for his country's deeds during the Second World War. He gives another example of German, that German boys are taken to concentration camps to see what their forefathers did to Jews in Germany. And he has given another example of Justin Trudeau of Canada, that how he apologized for the ship, the famous ship that we know, it was named what? I'm just coming to, it's a Komagata, the ship that you know, it was very historical event when Indian migrants were there and they were denied to port entry and virtually all of them perished. So here he said that Justin Trudeau has apologized for that incident. Will Brandt went to police ghettos and apologized. He was personally not that responsible and things like that. But being the Chancellor, being Justin Trudeau the head of the Canadian state, so likewise, at least for Jallianwala Bagh massacre, British King should apologize. They have not even apologized. One thing more he has mentioned in the passage, that British school children don't know anything, that what their forefathers did, how sort of violent, cruel and other means were taken to appropriate the richness of the vast Indo-Gangetic or all of the Indian subcontinents. London is today what it is because of the colonial loot that was perpetuated by the masters, but we find that their students, their boys are unaware of these things because it is not being taught in their school history textbooks. So at least they should be made aware of their forefathers' misdeeds that led to deprivation and penury of the rich societies, that was golden societies that was having the. So these things, that is the major, that it is a loot, first hand it is loot, and intransigence, that in the sense they are not unwilling to even say sorry, they are not willing to even apologize for the deeds that was done in the name of white man's burden to improve the natives and all. Then we have another article is, major article in this editorial section is, quiet diplomacy could ease South China Sea tension. As you know very well, South China Sea issue. What is this South China Sea issue? It's China's rising dominance is being very much resisted by other countries, especially Philippines and Southeast Asian countries, and to counter it, we know that Quad formation has been came into formation, Japan, USA, India and Australia. Now this whole thing is that South China Sea there is a law of the sea. That's the United Nations Convention of Law of Sea. And that is accordingly you have access to international waters, and your country's fishing communities, how far they can go to search for their fish, and other navigational freedom to operate for Coast Guard and things like that. But what we find that in South China Sea, China is totally unwilling to accept any international or even United Nations conventions on the law of the sea. And so these measures Philippines had now having a military cooperation with India also. You are aware of this fact that Philippines, South Korea, Japan, virtually all of these countries having near about American presence. And so this issue is says that quite diplomacy, because lawful they are not accepting. China is not China is unwilling to accept the law of the United Nations Convention of Sea on Law, and other measures they are doing bullying the other nations. So it has to be handled by quiet diplomacy. That is the essence of this particular issue, and we are knowing that South China issue is totally out of the China's rising military power. The money that they are investing, creating artificial islands in South China Sea and placing their fighter jets and missiles there. And now come to the two editorials that are weakening autonomy and migrant crisis. See, the first one, the weakening autonomy, deals with the recent Supreme Court order regarding the extension given to ED chief. We know that it very well that Supreme Court kept the amendment that was brought in by the government to give 3 consecutive extension, making it a tenure of 5 years. We know it very well that Vigilance Commission Act mandates it that a CBI or Enforcement Directorate chief will have, irrespective of his superannuation age, he will have 2 years tenure. Now the amendment was brought in wherein the chiefs can be given 3 extensions, 3 annual extensions consecutive, and thereby making their tenure of 5 years. Now the article editorial says that this characteristic policy of annual extension could betray the autonomy of these investigating agencies, for which Supreme Court had earlier mandated that a fixed tenure of 2 years should be there, irrespective of joining of the as the chief of CBI or ED. So this article, weakening autonomy, means whose autonomy is getting weakened. There's a Enforcement Directorate and CBI, they become parrots of the ruling government, ruling dispensation, because they have power and methods to influence the directors of Central Bureau of Investigation and Enforcement Directorate. That's one article. Another one in migrant crisis, that's in Netherlands. Has due to Europe is undergoing its change. Europe is undergoing, all of the continental Europe is going very much strategic, cultural, economic changes. You know that Brexit was there, United Kingdom came out of the European Union. Now European Unions are facing the Ukraine invasion by the Russian Republic. So Vladimir Putin's insistence on destroying Ukraine is creating lots of problem in European countries. They are having sanctions on Russia, and that has its own consequences. This is just an example. You could understand that Russian oil is bought by Indian refineries and being sold to crude oil is bought from Russia and being sold as a refined petroleum products to European countries. These sort of things are making them difficult, costly, and inflation is riding high in European. So this unemployment and other issues, apart from that migrant issues, influx of migrant, in particular this case studies of the Netherlands they are discussing, has created its own problem. We know it very well that recently in France there was riots by these Arab African origin people for the shooting down of a teenager in a busy traffic thoroughfare. So this what happens that all over Europe you find that right wing nationalist parties are having their say due to these chaotic situations. So Netherlands should take measures to curtail the rise of, because Europe has seen the German dealings of Jewish people during the earlier in the 20th century, that's before, prior to, around, you could say, the Second World War time. Now in opposite editorial, one important article is that how the CPI basket consists the inflation picture. How the CPI, what is CPI? Consumer price index. We have two: consumer price index, we have wholesale price index. It is consumer price index. So this article deals with the fact that the basket means the things that are taken into consideration for arriving for inflation data, that how far the prices has gone up. This basket consists of the things that are virtually obsolete now. The examples they have given of DVD recorders, cassettes, radio, transistors, torch. So these things that were earlier markers of. This generation of people are not knowing these things, but those who are a teenage child, those who have seen the economic liberalization of 1990s led by Manmohan Singh as a finance minister and Narasimha Rao as a prime minister, and opening of the economy, liberalization, privatization and globalization, and say rising of the middle class in India. So what the article says that this CPI, that's consumer price index basket in the sense the items that are taken into consideration for comparison of the rises of the price to the previous month by month, year by year. So it says that the things that are being considered are obsolete, it needs to be changed. A new item has to be brought into it, so that the true reflection of the consumer price index can get, and that will be beneficial for the economy as well as the governments. Now we come to the text and context. That is very beautiful section we always deal with. Today's text and context section. Now we have an article dealing with, is it possible to have partial app bans? You will realize that often Hindu is having the technology aspects. In previous issue we had dealt with chat GPT. Now it's a is it possible to have partial app bans? What happened during the, like recently in Manipur, the month on it went on violence and also what happened earlier in Jammu and Kashmir during the abolition of Article 370. What happened for months on, internet shutdown was maintained by the government of India. Now problem is that when internet complete shutdown is maintained, then other services do suffer, like banking, day-to-day transaction, ride-hailing apps and others. So economy, middle class economy suffers due to blanket ban on internet, that is complete shutdown. Now this Telecom Regulatory Authority of India has come out with certain measures asking that how could it be possible that we shall go for the particular banning of the particular app. So it deals with the term called net neutrality and how earlier it used to be misused by priorities of that time. Net neutrality means it says that every nature of all sort of data are getting equal access. Servers are not there to discriminate between the nature of the data. So that has everything has to be equal access. Now net neutrality and other factors are creating problem. Now it says that if we suppose ban the WhatsApp or messaging apps or something like that, they have encrypted end-to-end encryption, and so it's company has to cooperate with the government of India to make it somehow banning the messaging apps and letting other things operate. Then another issue that it talks about the VPN, virtual private networks. Okay, virtual, what is VPN? Virtual private networks are a sort of, you could say, your own servers. You have your own servers, government, you don't depend upon the telecom company's servers for relying off your internet. So these VPNs are costly, but it has its usage, like say whistleblowers, journalists, civil society activists. They can use these VPN services in order to have reliable and safe method of finding the information and things like that. But government has issued the VPN also, virtual private network also, and has mandated that you need to have your servers in this country. But often you will find that VPNs are not having their servers in the mother country, host country. They keep the server in other countries so that your law doesn't apply there, and they often change IP addresses also. You know, IP address in internet that identify a person's location, settings and things like that. So it can be easily not easy to identify the source of. Earlier government came out with the person that what happens in case of forwarding a malicious message on WhatsApp all. So you have to identify the source from where it originated, so that we can find the culprit, and accordingly he should be brought under the law and punished. Then one article is there in text and context section is the what is National Research Foundation. Okay, National Research Foundation, it's a basically modeled on the National Science Foundation of USA and other developed countries, wherein it is developing a mechanism to provide especially state universities funds from government as well as from the private sector for research developments, so that it can be conducted. It is in the legislative state. It has not been brought as an act yet, but it is being legislated, and it will have a mechanism where government as well as private sector will come out the funds in the National Research Foundation, and they will develop mechanisms so that funds could be released on time to the beneficiary, and scientists should not be concerned with the financial issues, and the registrar and other administrative officers will be responsible for disbursement of funds and dealing with it. It's a good initiative to start again the robust system of research and development, especially in science and technology fields in state universities. Then we have another one article, interesting article that we have is K literature. That's Korean pop, BTS, you are aware of all these things. New generation millennials know it very well. What is K-pop, what is BTS, and this article starts with that BTS 10th anniversary, and there is a book released on that. And in Bengaluru, the Books of Honor was very much enthusiastic and things like that. A BTS member will arrive and pick up the book, and fan followings are there. So they say that like K-pop, K-beauty, K-drama, K-pop, K-beauties, K-drama means Korean pop, Korean beauty, Korean drama, Korean literature has also arrived on the stage. And important thing is that some of the prominent women writers are there, and it facilitates the outside world to have access to a culture that is quite impossible to visit or visualize even. So by reading these novels that are being translated in English, and some of them has won the Man Booker Prize also for translation works, and it has been shortlisted also. Number of books are being mentioned here. You should read some of them, at least one of them, and that's all regarding this one. And then we have in the text and context section, one thing is that know your English. Okay, it's a old Hindu, in earlier days it used to publish. Now again they have started publishing. It's a very beautiful section wherein it goes for the uses of the sayings, words, phrases in beautiful manner by framing the sentences. So you must read it. Then we have other important news. In this case, one important news I would like to mention, and that is the Milan Kundera's death. Milan Kundera was a Czech novelist who lived most of his life in Paris, France, being because he was a communist outcast. He was earlier Czechoslovakia, Prague, you know it well, Czechoslovakia earlier. Nowadays Czechoslovakia is divided into two parts, Czech Republic and Slovakia, but earlier it was Czechoslovak. Okay, together they were. And Milan Kundera was a member of the Communist Party. He was expelled and virtually has to leave his homeland, and he lived all his life in Paris. And there his very famous work is The Unbearable Lightness of Being. The unbearable lightness of being. It's a story of two couples and their hardships and their decisions and what they choose to opt for. As we say, as Haruki Murakami had said earlier, that suffering is inevitable, but no, pain, sorry, the pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Likewise, in this book, in this Milan Kundera's cases, what we find that the Hindu has written, Sudipta Datta has written an article in the Times of India, that they have copy pasted the New York Times article on New York Times obituary of the Milan Kundera's death. So what we find that in this, the one important book, if you have to remember, that's Unbearable Lightness of Being. Another book was that Book of Laughter and Forgetting, and then he has one book of The Joke, that's a very famous book, Life is Elsewhere. And lastly, you could say that even Salman Rushdie has said that his works have influenced generations to come. And in this, the conditions that is now in Europe again reminds of the times when individual freedom and things were curtailed in the name of ideology, and how individual souls suffered and how they fought back, what sort of measures they took to cope up with the things. So this is the Milan Kundera. You should have an interest, you should be knowing him, and you should be knowing the works also. In the world section, quickly we conclude by saying that Zelensky processed with bid for Ukraine's NATO entry. He is very much desperate to enter into NATO so that he could battle out Russian Republic. That's okay, things to follow. And another one is that despite conservative backlash, EU Parliament backs biodiversity bills. So you will read this article also. So I think that it's overall these are the major issues that we have taken out. It's a more important to read it, and thank you very much for listening to this one. Thank you very much once again.